Good afternoon. My name is Nikola Burazer, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you here today on the online event organized by Friedrich Ebert Stiftung offices in Belgrade and Pristina, in which we are going to discuss the newest paper, Quantitative Assessment of the Implementation of the Belgrade-Pristina Dialogue. First, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Max Brendle, the director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office in Belgrade.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our event today on Brussels agreements between Kosovo and Serbia. My name is Max Brendle. I'm director of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office here in Belgrade. Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is celebrating its 25th anniversary with the office in Belgrade, so we have been here since 1996, and we are here to support democracy and the European integration of Southeast Europe and of Serbia. The dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade has been dragging on for many years. And although many ideas and creative ideas have been put forward, it might seem that we can discuss this forever and nothing is going to be achieved. But I'm happy that we have an event today that looks more deeply into what has actually been going on and what has been agreed upon and implemented. And surprisingly enough, it is not all that dull. So I hope that we can contribute to a more optimistic and positive outlook on this format, to see what has been agreed upon and what has been implemented and what has been achieved, and of course also what still lies ahead of us. So I'm happy that we can have this event with our guests and authors of the study that you can also find online, and that we can do this together with our office in Belgrade and with my colleagues in Pristina. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague René Schlee in the FES office in Kosovo.
Thank you, Max. Hi. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for your participation. My name is René Schlee. I'm the head of office of FAS in Kosovo, here located in Pristina. We've been here for, well, last year was supposed to be our 20 years anniversary, so I always joke once the pandemic allows, as we will have the 20 plus 1 year celebration, and very much looking forward to that. So I would just like to echo what Max said with regard to the dialogue, especially after all these years. Sometimes from the outside it might look like an intractable process, a very slow-moving, very technocratic process, and I'm very happy and very thankful to the authors that they enlighten us and shed some light on that. Actually, when it comes down to some very concrete agreements, and I'm quoting here, providing solutions to very practical problems, and thus normalizing relations between Kosovo and Serbia on a very practical level. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussions that we will have during this event. Just a small comment from our side is why we were particularly delighted to collaborate here with our partner office in Belgrade, is that of course we just over a week we had elections, and Albin Kurti is by all expectations the soon-to-be new Prime Minister of Kosovo, and with that we will hopefully return to a very European way of dealing with the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, in terms of a dialogue that is centered around the ambition of normalizing relations through a well-structured process, no quick deals, but rather transparent but continuous work. And in this light, I also understand this study of taking stock, basically, okay, what has already happened. And I very much enjoyed reading it, as it sheds, as Max already outlined, a bit of a different angle than you usually get. So with that, I will close, and thank you very much again to everybody for showing up, but particularly, of course, to my colleague Max, his team, and the authors. Thank you.
We have here with us today two of the authors of this paper, Mr. Špetin Gaši, the Vice President of the Council for Inclusive Governance, and Mr. Igor Novakovic, the Associate in Serbia of the Council for Inclusive Governance. So let's begin with their introductory remarks. Mr. Gaši, you have the floor.
Thank you. Igor and I have been doing this dialogue for too long, probably now. And we've been looking at every agreement. But at some point, we also ourselves got confused. President Vučić says we have 47 agreements. Mr. Thaci, former president of Kosovo, says 36. Edita Tahir, the chief negotiator, says 36. And we have Albin Kurti at 28. And we thought, okay, let's collect these documents and see how many agreements do we have. What we found was 47 documents. Now, we don't know if Mr. Vučić was referring to these documents as agreements. And these 47 documents don't include Richard Grenell's highway and railway documents. And we looked at these documents, and we found that some of them are agreements, and some of them are revisions of the original agreements, and some are simply implementation plans. Then what we did, we grouped them into area agreements, and we came up with the number 21. Probably should have done 20. It's easier to remember. And of these 21 agreements, we found out that 10 have been fully implemented. 6 have been largely implemented, 4 partially, and 1 has not been implemented. Probably you all know that's the association. We have all these documents. We found that there are about 150 pages. So what we try to do is basically to simplify this into a readable and easy to understand document, but without compromising the content of the agreements. So what we did, we found these core points. For instance, in the freedom of movement agreement, we have about 10-15 pages, but we brought it down to five points. And we probably have been a little bit liberal in the assessing the implementation. And there are some points there that could be a matter of interpretations. But we really just have looked, I mean, everything is on the paper. We have nothing to add. We haven't tried to assign blame to any of the parties. We haven't looked why some agreements have been implemented and some have not. It's just we wanted to have a document where everything is in one paper because of the confusion that has been going on for a long time now, and just let people for themselves see and decide whether the Brussels dialogue have been good or not, or whether it has produced some benefits. And so that's all on my part.
Špetin? Igor?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, our intention here was not to paint rosy the whole dialogue process. Some would say that our assessment that 80% was implemented is too optimistic. But in fact, our aim was to show that there is some success with the process that we had, that the principle of incremental step-by-step negotiations is also had some effects, and that there is actually a prospect for successful building on the results of the dialogue that we had so far. So incremental process up to us is not bad per se, and despite it did not result in conflicts ending or comprehensive agreement, as some would say, it actually improved the situation and created some normality on the ground. I would just like you all to remember that at the beginning of this process 10 years ago, one of the main issues was whether the leaders would meet or if they would shake their hands. So, and as Špetin said, many times we heard from our colleagues or politicians criticism regarding the results of the process. we realized that there is too much confusion about elements of the agreements, and the even sometimes even a basic lack of knowledge of what was agreed. I mean, probably many of these documents you can find on the official web pages of the Serbian Kosovo institutions, but the fact is that there is no unified interpretation of what was agreed. We, of course, acknowledge that there is a number of practical problems surrounding the implementation of agreements or their interpretation, but still that cannot confront the fact that many things were actually implemented as they were agreed. I would say in the end that that our analysis and also these different interpretations tell us that actually that one of the basic problems with the whole process is that we did not have one unified interpretation of what was agreed, and that contributed to a much confusion that was created in the official discourses. And in the end of this first statement, I would say that that this clearly shows that constructive ambiguity, which was the guiding principle, I would say, even of the whole process, has probably served its purpose, and that it is a time for a new approach, but still that incremental approach should not be labeled as necessarily bad, and that there are some good elements about it.
Thank you, Igor. First, I'd like to ask you the question which I think that most of our viewers here would like to ask you as well, and this is when you look at the percentages which you put in your paper, it seems to me much more optimistic than what the other experts or other analysis are showing when it comes to the percentage of implementation of the agreements within the dialogue. Why did you opt for this particular methodology for research? And how do you explain this big difference between what is your research and what are your conclusions, and what is, let's say, the assessment of some other experts or their analysis? Let's begin with Švetin.
Yeah, how did we come to the number? Now, for instance, if you look at the paper, you have the freedom of movement agreement, for instance, 6 or 7 points, core points. So we took all the points of each agreement, and then we divided by the total number. We came to the 80%. Now there are some things that people, for instance, freedom of movement agreement. For instance, it says that the Serbs in the north, if they want to register their cars, they don't have to pay the extra fees as if bringing the car from another country, which would happen for Serbian citizens, for instance. Now, the Serbs in the north, they haven't done it. Very few have done it. But if they want to register their cars who have now Serbian plates and they want to have with Kosovo plates, they don't have to pay the extra fees. Now, we consider that as implemented because Pristina committed to allow them rates without the extra fees, and they're respecting that part of the agreement. So that point we consider as implemented. Some people, if you go to the north, they say, what are these guys talking about? Everybody's driving with Serbian plates. So, but as Igor also mentioned, we're really just looking how much of what has been agreed is implemented. So, and then, this is what we're looking, and that's why perhaps it looks 80%, it looks a little bit high, but it's not.
But do you think this is a more accurate assessment of what is the true rate of implementation?
I think this is more accurate than we've read. We've read a lot of documents, Pristina's assessment reports, Belgrade's assessment reports. I think they produce these reports, used to produce every month or 3 months or something. And but they give their own version. I mean, what we've looked is really we haven't relied much on what they say. We have talked to officials in Pristina, in Belgrade. We've looked at their reports. But our methodology kind of just being at looking at the action on the ground. For instance, now with the documents. Now, again, some people could say that the car plates agreement is not being implemented. because Kosovars have to remove their Rakasa plates and put the Serbian. But this is what has been agreed. That's what has been agreed, that with Kasa plates, they don't have to remove the Rakasa plates. Now, is this a good agreement? No. In 21st century, in the middle of Europe, you have to remove your car plates because the other side doesn't like it, or as our colleague of ours says, that when you cross Merdare, Shavsigar is more important than oil, than gas. So, but we haven't looked at the quality of the agreement. Just what has been agreed, has it been implemented? I think that that's why we came at 80%, and I think any one of our colleagues can make their own assessment, and I guarantee they would come to the same number.
Igor, do you agree with this assessment?
Well, what I can say that probably the assessments and research from that was done by the others looked at some agreements as not implemented because some parts of it remained not implemented. So we applied, let's put it like this, more positive methodology. We actually divided these area agreements into segments and then looked segment by segment what is implemented and what is not. So, and we did not label the whole agreement as not implemented if one element was not implemented. So that's it. And we have 3 grades: partially implemented, fully implemented, and
not
implemented.
Mm-hmm. But is this only a matter of methodology? Because if somebody read your paper first, he or she would think that, well, the dialogue was a success. More than 80% has been implemented. And then general opinion is that the dialogue was not so much a success in terms of implementation. Why is there this impression that the dialogue was basically a failure? Is this something which is based on facts, or is it the general impression which has some political background to it?
So I would say 2 things. First, that this topic is largely consumed by the main issue in the first Brussels agreement from 2013, and that is association/community of Serbian majority municipalities. Because this part was not implemented, many tend to look at the whole process as quite problematic. But we showed that actually there are many other issues that were solved successfully. The second part is that both sides, and we could see this for a number of times, used elements of the dialogue for exchange of political fire. So their attitude in many cases was not positive, but they were just pointing to the negative sides of it, and that is, in my mind, that is the reason why in discourses, I think the European, Kosovo and Serbia, we have this tendency to look at the dialogue as a failure, or let's say problematic.
And looking at all of these agreements, do you see some factors why certain agreements implemented and some are not? Is it a matter of whether they're, let's say, more politically sensitive, or they're just maybe harder to implement because of some technical reasons? What do you see as the main factors here?
Let's put it like this. I mean, if you look at the first agreement from 2013, you remember that there was also an implementation plan for it. And if we analyze how much time did it take for the major part of the agreement, I mean, apart from the association, to be implemented, it took more than 2 or 3 years. So sometimes, the things on terrain are complicated, and even the implementation plan is too optimistic. Then there are some political obstacles for the implementation, because in certain times it is not opportune to make a breakthrough when there is some sort of political tension between the 2 sides. But nevertheless, with all the bad sides of the dialogue, let's put it like that, and limitations, this process, at least until 2017, was pretty much steady. So maybe Spetin has something to add.
No, about the first question, why a lot of people think this was a failure, I think people's expectations were that this dialogue will resolve the conflict through a peace deal. And this is also what the negotiators promoted. This is also what Brussels promoted. Even now we have Mr. Lajčák who says we'll reach a comprehensive deal. And that Brussels did not resolve the conflict, basically. And I think that's why people look at it as a failure. On why some agreements have been implemented, why some have not, I think I'll just give you an example. The association, for instance, they agreed in forming a body, but without agreeing how can they accommodate it to Kosovo's legal system. So to really establish the association as a public institution, you need quite a few laws to accommodate it in the constitution. Because now the Constitutional Court, for instance, that the association can be established, have an administration, as many people as they can have grants, but the employees will not be public employees. Basically, would be an NGO. Some others, like energy, I think, and the telephone code, there was also more. These are kind of sovereign prerogatives. When we look at it, only states have those, and I think that's why it kind of at points would stall. So issues with less political sensitivities were easier to be implemented.
And looking at these 10 years, what is your overall assessment? Is there a political will to actually engage seriously in the dialogue, or it was more a matter of ticking boxes and agreeing on something which is debatable whether it can be implemented at all? By looking at your research, it seems that most of it was actually implemented.
As Igor mentioned, when we think about 10 years ago, because President Tadic started this dialogue, he was reluctant to shake hands with Kosovo's leaders. And now, 10 years later, we have all these agreements. 10 years ago, you couldn't come to Belgrade with a Kosovo document. Now, 10 years later, we have probably 500,000 of Albanian diaspora that travel through Serbia. We have in 2013, we had a north full of barricades that you couldn't really go there. Even KFOR had problems. 10 years later, now we have a north where Serb turnout in a Kosovo election is over 70%, twice the number that is in the rest of Kosovo. I think these are results that perhaps seem to be not enough for the regular citizens, because I think the conflict is not resolved, because what they see every day is say, Serbian leadership, Kosovo is ours, we'll never let it go, and then Albanians say, okay, nothing has been achieved. Or you see on the Kosovo side, the association will never form it, even though they agreed to it. So I think that people are paying more attention. It's also easier to media statements than to sitting down like Igor and I, thanks to the pandemic, we had nothing else to do, and sitting down and reading all these 150 boring documents.
Well, if you look at this entire process, you mentioned in your paper that people usually compare what was done to what could have been done, but not maybe to some other conflicts which are similarly complicated. If you look at it from this perspective, would you see this entire process as a successful process? Of course, it's not completed yet, but is it something which we can say that the results were significant and were impressive in comparison to some other issues which took, let's say, more decades to be concluded, or maybe not even concluded in the end?
I'd say compared to other similar conflicts with territorial status disputes, I think this is I'd say one of the most successful. For another paper before, we've looked at these conflicts, and this is one of the most successful. In 10 years, the normalization of relations is real, is serious, and then this dialogue has built some solid ground for a comprehensive normalization, or later for the status. And I think this is primarily because there was serious engagement on the part of the European Union and the United States, and the leaderships in Kosovo and Serbia, they were reluctant to reach any agreements, but they came around. Some pressure worked. But I'd say that this is relatively successful negotiation process, but as Igor mentioned before, incremental. But now Igor and I are not so sure the same process could work in the future. The incremental process was perfect in resolving some of the technical issues, but now we've run out of these technical problems. Now we really reach the status. And unless a new process addresses the status dispute, we don't see that it's going to have the same success as the old Brussels dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that does not mean that if in the new process there are some achievements that could be easily implemented, that this principle should be taken out. In a sense that what we think that even in the new process, whenever there is a success, these things should be implemented and not wait for the final agreement to happen.
Mm-hmm. When the dialogue process started, one of the justification for the process was that it should improve the lives of citizens in both Serbia and Kosovo, disregarding some of the political concerns. But recent research done by the Belgrade Center for Security Policy and the Kosovo Center for Security Studies shows that citizens of both Serbia and Kosovo do not really see benefits from the dialogue. They don't really see any benefits to themselves. Do you think that there actually is, or there are benefits to the citizens of Serbia and Kosovo, which maybe they aren't even aware of? Do you see that it has practically improved the lives of the citizens? Of course, the Kosovo Serbs maybe is the group which may have been impacted the most by the agreements. What is your assessment of this?
Well, again, it is a matter of interpretation. So, and the matter of expectations, both on the ground in Serbia and in Kosovo. So I think one of the basic ideas behind the whole process was also, at least for example, in Serbia, is to solve certain issues and then to start also parallel with that the process of the EU integration, which would actually, with the implementation of all reforms, contribute to the improvement of the daily lives of the citizens. We should also ask, I mean, I know about that research, but I haven't read it in detail. I would like really to see what would be assessment of people from the regions that are close to the boundary between Serbia and Kosovo. So for example, those who daily cross the line between that have communication and businesses, and cooperation. For example, I know one concrete example, one small company from Niš who are cooperating with the people from Pristina. What were the effects for them? So we should also investigate these examples to see what are concrete effects. Also, the major group that was affected with this negotiation process were Serbs in the north. And of course, during the implementation of all of these agreements, there was a number of problems and issues that they faced, and probably through the lagging of the whole process and these problems, also some dissatisfaction was expressed, and also regarding their will to be integrated, but this is another story.
Špetin, what are your experiences with how the things have changed on the ground, and whether do we can actually see when you talk to people, let's say above all Serbs in Kosovo, do they see the benefits?
No, I think it's still, again, about the expectations. Now, if people thought that dialogue is going to bring jobs and higher wages, I think that's dialogue was not supposed to do. Has it improved the lives of the people? I think it has. Now I know, hundreds of thousands of people who, for instance, from diaspora who travel through Serbia. It's a lot shorter and easier travel. Now, for instance, trade. Kosovars, after the Brussels agreement, can sell their produce in Serbia. Now, Kosovo has a huge trade deficit with Serbia, but that's another problem, is Kosovo doesn't have much to sell, doesn't produce much to sell. Then you got a telephone code. Kosovo got a telephone code, so now they're paying, just give you an example, Kosovo was using this Monaco 377 code. They were paying 25 million euros a year just to use their code. So now these 25 million euros could be saved and used for something else. Now, it's another story that the politics is very corrupt. in Serbia and Kosovo, and the money is saved there is stolen by someone else. So, and I think that the people should not look at their, connect dialogue and governance. I think the problem that we have poor people, we have poor economies, is purely governance. And if actually the governments in Pristina and Belgrade were just as effective as the Brussels government, probably the lives of the people would be much better. But I think we should just look at the dialogue and not connect it to the overall economic performance, or because you go to and the Serbs I think the Serbs now it's much better it's still not as it should be, but the relations are better among Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo. The north is a little bit more complicated, but even the north is a lot better. You don't have barricades anymore. You kind of have some. Now there is this fund for development for the north, for instance. Again, now we come to the governance. They agreed for this fund, so they collect the revenues from two crossing points in the north, so that money doesn't go directly to Pristina's central budget. And the fund has collected now about 15 million euros, but it's not used because there is no capacity to, and the fund could be used only for investment. And it's not used because the local authorities are not capable of using it for investment capacities, and they released some funds first, and there were a few conferences here and there. So it's again, the problem is really the governance capacity, and I think also part of the problem why the agreements have not been fully implemented. It's not purely lack of political will, but also lack of capacities. We have the agreement on stickers. The Srkasa, Srba, they would cover with stickers and not remove the car plates. And we found a paper, for instance, which Kosovo had asked Brussels to delay the implementation of 2008, to delay because they had a problem with the tender. Now, we didn't look, what's 2018? So they asked for the delay, and now it's 3 years later. The stickers are not there yet produced. Now, I don't know, maybe we should open a company and produce the stickers.
So what I get from this is basically you believe that there were some improvements, but having in mind that they're not really, I would say, visible to the citizens. I mean, according to the surveys, do not really see those benefits. And not only citizens, we can all agree that many experts have a very negative opinion about the dialogue and implementation. Why is that so? Is there a problem in the discourse about the dialogue? Is it a problem about the communication about the dialogue, both in Serbia and Kosovo? Why is something which, according to your research, can be observed as something more positive than negative, is so harshly criticized?
I mean, it's a little bit of all the points you mentioned. First, the dialogue was trashed by the very people who ran it. It's rarely you see negotiators trashing their own process. You have the Kosovo negotiators, Serbian negotiators trashing it, issuing reports that the other side is not implementing anything, we're implementing everything. And then I think on the EU part, they wanted to stay kind of a neutral mediator, really neutral, and then they never came out to explain some of the issues, and they actually haven't been promoting this very well. There have been a few NGOs that tried to promote here and there. So it's the negotiators trashing their own process, the EU not promoting it enough, and the citizens having inflated expectations from it, that this will resolve the conflict and then everything will be fine.
Yeah, on the other hand, I just wanted to say something regarding the role of the EU. I mean, throughout the process, there is an impression actually that the EU acted more as a facilitator for the meetings than as the actual mediator. And as I said in the beginning, there is an apparent lack of the official interpretation of what was agreed coming from the EU, because that would resolve many things that were politically contested throughout the years.
There was a time 2 years ago when basically many people would agree that the dialogue has basically failed. I'm referring to the period when the 100% tariffs basically stopped the dialogue. It has been stopped for a year and a half and only continued last July. How do you see the results of implementation after the dialogue was, let's say, relaunched or continued last summer, did you find any particular important agreements being implemented in this period and some improvements in general in the dialogue?
Well, of course, there is an agreement on IBM. So on Merdare crossing point, the two teams, the officials of Kosovo.
Sorry to interrupt. We saw. I mean, we heard about this. Let's say high-level dialogue rounds. All the attention was on that, and then only we heard, let's say, somewhere that there's going to be also some technical agreements, but they're not really important technical dialogue. And I guess this is actually more important when it comes to this particular issues. Is this what maybe did we see last year, that things are actually happening below the surface?
Yeah, in quiet, we saw some important agreements being implemented or partially implemented. IBM is not finished because we still have two crossing points in the north, which should be also integrated. But for example, on Merdare, where the whole facility was built several years ago, we have finally integrated border boundary management, and then also we had this agreement on energy, which was sort of unilaterally implemented. But then again, because Serbia did not participate in it, they outlined, Serbia's office for Kosovo outlined the issues in the last report, which was, I think, issued in the mid-2020, why certain things were not happening as they should, according to them. But still, this agreement was finally implemented because I think this problem was not just related to Serbia-Kosovo problems, but also for pan-European electric grid, let's put it like that. I'm not an expert in it, but we all know this issue with clocks in whole Europe being late for 5 minutes. And then
seconds.
Sorry?
Seconds.
5 seconds, and not minutes.
So we cannot complain that we don't have an effect on the European Union.
You know, but nevertheless, you know, as one of our colleagues pointed out, that actually there will be also good sides from this agreement, not just regarding the safety of distribution of electricity in the north, but also regarding the opening of the energy markets of Kosovo and Albania for Serbia. And, you know, but then again, it was still implemented unilaterally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I'd like to open the floor to the audience. Please, if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand or write something in chat so we would be able to see that. Of course, I encourage you to use this remaining 20 minutes for discussion with our authors here. And in the meantime, I'd like to shift the focus on what's next. I mean, you have analyzed this last 10 years of the dialogue, but expectations right now are relatively high after the dialogue was relaunched last July. Well, first of all, you assessed the different agreements. Mm-hmm. Do you see that maybe there are some specific issues which are yet to be resolved before we are actually discussing the final comprehensive agreement?
Well, there are, and you can see that in our report, apart from, of course, association, community of Serb majority municipalities in Kosovo, which is certainly the major issue. There is a number of other issues like cadastre, for example, which is not yet implemented. There are also, I mean, some of our colleagues from Serbia also claim that without solving of, for example, issues like property or the cultural heritage, it will be really hard to tackle the final agreement. And they consider that these issues should be on the table before discussing final settlement.
Should maybe this be a part of the final settlement? We have also heard some rumors that even those parts of the previous rounds of the dialogue which were not implemented be actually implemented or agreed again within the new agreement.
Well, but then again,
two schools of thought on this.
Of course, but we, until now, what we saw, I mean, this is just my opinion.
Of course.
I'm not saying this in front of my organizations or and it does not necessarily reflect Spetim's opinion.
We can ask him as well.
Yeah, of course. But in my view, if something is agreed, it should be implemented as soon as possible. Simply because, and we saw it a number of times in the past, it could be a subject of different political interpretations used for political clashes, exchange of fire, etc. So, and then again, also, there is apparent lacking of the real mechanism for implementation of these agreements. So, you know, that is also the reason why the implementation was so even or slow, according to some views. But the thing is, for me, I don't think that if the two sides reach any agreement that they should wait for the final settlement to have it all as a big bang. Simply because we would face, again, probably we would face certain issues along the road.
Mm-hmm. Spetim, do you agree with this assessment?
I mean, as I agree with Igor that the remaining agreements should be implemented on the Brussels dialogue, or they could be implemented. That's what left. For the rest now, we have missing persons, for instance. So we have some property issues, cultural heritage. But I think this probably will have to be part of a final comprehensive agreement. So I think that if the new process focuses on, again, technical, it won't be as successful as the previous dialogue. I think it's really time to tackle the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm. I think we have our first question here. Does public opinion in Kosovo always understand high-level political dialogue and the technical dialogue as a coherent, unified process? I believe you can both try to answer this question.
This was an invention at the beginning. This is pure invention, technical and political. And I think this was done because neither side was willing in 2010 to enter into negotiations. Serbia was saying this is part of our territory, how you don't enter into negotiations with your territory. Kosovo was saying we will not talk to Serbia until they recognize us. So what they found, let's do technical. Now the first agreement, among the first few agreements was IBM, Integrated Border Boundary Management. Is that technical? Then telephone code. It was also, is it technical? I don't see anything technical there. Recognition of ID cards, car plates. I mean, they all have their political part. So I think that the citizens actually understood as it was. There is one dialogue. There is no political and technical. So they understand as one dialogue. But according to them, whose aim was to come to a conclusion of this century-old conflict.
Is the reason why maybe we have this separation between political and technical dialogue so that the place where things are actually, let's say, agreed how to be implemented are less visible? Was that maybe the intention? That we see the presidents, prime ministers shaking hands, agreeing in fundamental, about some particular issues on a fundamental level, but then when it comes to operationalization, it is somehow outside the public view. Was it something deliberate?
Well, I would say it's also about how the media function. I would say in the Balkans. As Rambo Amadeus said, I think after October the 5th, 2000, we should think more about we should have media that talk more about what was agreed than that the agreement happened. So the focus of attention is in many cases that somebody shook hands, that they met, that they had a meeting, but about the content of the meeting, we rarely have the deep analysis. That's the problem. So,
yeah, basically, so the dialogue is when you see them shaking hands in front of Federica Mogherini or Catherine Ashton or Lajčák.
And what we were really missing, for example, okay, there was an agreement on energy, telecommunications. We needed really something to experts to explain that to ordinary citizens, because some elements of these agreements are really complicated and not really easy to comprehend. And we did not have that. We have, okay, the energy agreement was reached. Now we are going to implementation, but what does it really contain? We did not get a really good explanation. And what are the main issues and problems? It was mostly left to several journalists in certain political magazines in Serbia, for example, or to the civil society to try to explain, to explain it.
Just to add, like again about the benefits, the energy that Igor. Now Kosovo became energy independent, kind of in the region, so it's not connected to the Serbian system anymore. But why the citizens don't see it? Because the energy sector inside the country is bought by some corrupt Turkish company, and the prices are going up every day. The network is from Tito's time, still Tito's time. So they make 100 million euros in profit every year. The system is breaking down every day. Prices are going up. So again, the dialogue did what it could, but the governance is, the problem is the governance. You sell the distribution network for 2 million people for 26 million euros, which is 2 kilometers of highway. A Turkish company, the contracts are not public. So the people are not happy with our governance, and I think then that's also reflected towards their views about the dialogue.
We have one more question in chat. It's a bit long, but I'm going to read all of it. What do you think about regional cooperation initiatives, specifically the common regional market agenda from the Berlin process? Could they help resolve issues which coincide with the dialogue, such as recognition of diplomas, traveling with ID cards, etc.? Can multilateral forums actually work better to tackle some issues than bilateral one covered by the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue? I would also include the question of mini Schengen into this as some kind of a project which was on principle agreed that Kosovo will join it. So what are your assessments of this?
Yeah, I think that this regional common market and the Schengen initiative, I think it's the same idea. I think this is what would work best for the region. And I understand now we have Kosovo, Montenegro, Bosnia a bit reluctant to join, arguing that Serbia, Albania, and Macedonia are a little bit further ahead, and we're going to be the losers. But I think if they agree on a free and fair trade, if some of those countries need to protect some of their industries in an interim period, they can agree on that. But I think this would be best first for the region, and then it could work for normalizations of relations between Kosovo and Serbia. Now, if they agree to travel on ID cards and remove these borders, and then you drive from Belgrade to Tirana, you never know when you entered Kosovo and when you left Kosovo. And the other way goes for the others. And I think then this could, for a while, you kind of avoid the status. Because I don't see the status being resolved anytime soon. But I think this is just the international community should do a little bit of more work in convincing the countries that are reluctant. And also, now what we've seen, Albania and Serbia, they seem to have goodwill in words, but in action is not reflected. For instance, now I have if President Vucic supports this so much, this mini Schengen, maybe as a sign of goodwill, he could say to Kosovo, you know what, you don't have to remove these car plates anymore, because we're talking about a common regional market.
Can all this then be a replacement for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue? If we assume that there is no political will for reaching this comprehensive normalization agreement, is it possible for the governments to simply say, okay, we're going to just forget about this, and now we're going to resolve all of our open issues through these multilateral forums, and leave this comprehensive agreement to some time when actually there's going to be political will to reach it? Is it imaginable this is going to happen, especially having in mind that the new Kosovo government, the future Kosovo government, has pretty much reserved position about the dialogue?
No, I think this I see it more as a complement to, not a replacement of this bilateral dialogue. I think that the regional multilateral initiatives will not be able to resolve the status, which is something that I think has to be resolved. Otherwise, you come a new generation. Then the possibilities for conflict are there. As long as you have in Serbian constitution, Kosovo is part of Serbia. As long as even in Kosovo, seeing the Serb population as something foreign, something that could be harmful in an eventual conflict or something, I think we need this bilateral channel, but it should be a little bit bolder, I think, on the part of the international community. We need to get out, to get the status out of the way, to really have fully normal relations between societies and also institutions.
Igor, your opinion on this?
I would like to also to say something. I think that all of these initiatives are not. We can look them as a separate process from the process of the dialogue, and it is a complementary thing. But in my view, it is good to redirect first attention, and then also to focus the attention of people more on cooperation, and also it could contribute to removal of certain things, practical things, on the agenda from the agenda. For example, the recognition of diplomas. If there are, I don't know, professional chambers of commerce that are tasked with the recognition of qualifications, that would certainly remove certain challenges from the table. And then, of course, it could contribute to the improvement of the freedom of movement, creation of the regional labor market. I mean, and that itself could bring more normality into the process, because if I don't know, people from Belgrade, from Niš, go to Pristina to work because their skills are needed there and they can achieve higher paycheck. I'm just giving an example. That would certainly bring some normality to the ground.
But
and vice versa, of course.
Why was there such opposition in Kosovo to joining this mini Schengen initiative? Albin Kurti, when he was the prime minister, opposed this idea, and it took the Washington Agreement to actually have Kosovo agree to join the mini Schengen. Why is that so? Why is there so much opposition to this particular project, having in mind the opportunities?
There is a huge trade deficit between Serbia and Kosovo. Now Kosovo imports legally about 350 million euros a year, plus they say another 50 million, but exports only about 100,000 euros. So it's 95.5, and they in Kosovo they see the Serbian industries more developed, better production capacities than these economies of scale, and they think that if they open completely the borders, then Kosovo's little industry will be wiped out, agriculture.
Yeah, but the same goes for the common regional market and the regional economic area before that, and we haven't seen any opposition to this idea back then.
And then the thing is that a lot of people that I've talked to, they believe it's just going to be a free trade. It can be free, but also fair. I mean, we saw it work in the European Union. Germany and Greece, they have different markets, but it seems like it worked for both of them. But also this agreement would allow, for instance, Kosovo, Montenegro, or others to protect some of their industries for a period of time. Now, but I think Montenegro, I think they believe they're a little bit further ahead in the European integration process, and they don't want to be in the same group with the rest of the Balkans, because they say then EU will look us as one group, and it will design an integration process for the whole group as a group, not at the individual states. Bosnia, I don't know, but as Igor mentioned, this common market would resolve really a lot of things. Now think about this: travel. Somebody from Sarajevo, to go to Pristina, he has to first go to Tirana, get a visa, which would take 2 days, and then travel to Pristina. The same goes around. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
Yes, I know people who actually had this kind of problems. It's not really pleasant.
Also, regarding mini Schengen, I think that the basic problem there was also political in nature. First of all, there are two seemingly competing projects that are actually about the same thing. So, regional economic area, MAPREA, and then mini Schengen. Mini Schengen is a leadership project that was started by our President of Serbia, Prime Minister of Albania, and Prime Minister of North Macedonia. So Kurti, and this is again my own opinion, in his mind saw this as problematic because it was initiated by two leaders with whom he had clashes in the public sphere. He had clashes with Mr. Vučić and he had clashes with Mr. Rama. And that was probably not enough for him in that moment to reject the idea or to label it as something that is detrimental to Kosovo's interests. But you know, the EU for a number of years now, and it started already, I think, at the end of 1990s, and then it speeded up in the first decade of 2000s. That we have a number of regional initiatives, different ones, and these final initiatives regarding the regional economic zones are just the extension of all the plans and preparation for the, I hope, future membership of all of us in the EU. Yeah, that's it, in the future.
And so it'll be interesting to see what happens next with the mini Schengen initiative. We have one more question and 1 more minute. Maybe you can prolong this to 2 minutes, if you can try to answer this. So what is your view of the commitments made by Belgrade and Pristina at the White House last September? So we go to this Washington agreement, which I previously mentioned. Are they complementary and will they help move forward implementation of the Brussels agreement? Now it's pretty hard to maybe to assess the Washington agreement in its entirety, but do you see any positives in this?
Well, I mean, there are a few, now that agreement has everything. Now a few points have been implemented. I think Pristina has designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. This embassy in Israel. But some of the points now I think what's going to happen is that they're going to review some of these points, whether they're implemented, because you know the author is not around, Mr. Granell, and now it's really and when we look at it, it's just a list of commitments. It's not really an agreement, and then is it I'd say it's complementary to the Brussels dialogue, and then some of the things they're very good there, like this infrastructure projects. But then the problem with the agreement is that it doesn't say where is the money for these infrastructure projects. Now we have DFC in Belgrade, but that agency doesn't give money to countries. So if Belgrade and Pristina want to build a highway or a railway, there is no money from DFC, just the idea is coming from DFC. And the idea that Pristina and Belgrade can build a railway, it can come from anyone. But I think that the Washington agreement seems like it was done for some benefits for the Washington authors. And the things that I think don't require money could be implemented. Also this point about Gazivoda as energy source. Gazivoda, I mean, I speak to some of the people who understand Gazivoda. They say Gazivoda as energy source. It's not an energy source.
It's a lighter for the thermal plants in Kosovo. So it's basically its production of energy is relatively insignificant in comparison with thermal power plants which are in Kosovo. Basic resource there is water.
But do you think that these particular points of the agreement will have a future? So disregarding the Israel and the 5G network,
well,
is there going to be some, let's say, implementation or let's say consequences of this agreement?
I would say that, of course, 5G network already has consequences, and I think
I said disregarding this because I would say this is a different kind of issue.
But also, again, my own opinion is that this agreement is to a large extent complementary to the efforts of the EU. It has the elements that were previously discussed throughout the Brussels dialogue, throughout the Berlin process, etc. So I think that there will be, all of these projects will eventually be implemented. But also, I think there are also certain things that are related to the strategic interest of the US, and that we will see build up on it. The problem here is that the new administration in the US should first formulate its view on the whole agreement, and also its view regarding certain other policies in the world that are also reflected in this agreement.
Yeah.
In one sentence, I think the future of this agreement will be the same as the future of Grenell and Trump.
Okay. That's a pessimistic assessment.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Maybe we'll come back in a few years. Let us conclude this. I believe we have time for this one final question. Let's try to be brief. So, many have focused on a central political settlement as a deal between Serbia and Kosovo, most recently and controversially with a border swap. Is it right to think about the bold political compromise as the basis of an agreement, or is a broader and longer term accretion of economic relations in the context of regional and European integration needed to obviate the need for a political compromise? A bit of a complicated question, but let's say that is it going to be this bold political agreement, or there is another way around?
I think this bold agreement through some territorial changes had a very good chance from 15 to 18. But I think with the main actor on the other side, Mr. Thaci, gone, the chances are really low. But again, we have some EU countries, notably Germany, who are really against this, mostly because of the implication it could have for the region. So I don't think we should expect a bold compromise. I think what we're going to see is maybe build a few more steps before we come to the status solution, which I think will be about 5 hours before Serbia joins the European Union.
Well, that's a long time then, as things stand at the moment. Igor?
I don't have anything.
Igor and I will write another paper after 10 years.
You know, after all, I mean, bold political moves. We saw that some of the major breakthroughs were made in a total cacophony of different information. So let's see what will happen. I don't think right now in this moment, with the change of the government in Pristina, with the change of government in the US, that we will see some major breakthroughs anytime soon. I expect first for the new ruling majority in Pristina to consolidate its power, to consolidate its positions, and only after that we can talk about something new. Well,
I'd like to thank both of you for being speakers here on this panel. I'd like to thank Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for welcoming us here, and of course to thank all of you who are watching us through Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. So have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.